Hey, you guys, it's me, Rachel, your digital art teacher just for this week. I wanted to record the next project so that you could have an opportunity to keep making progress, keep moving forward. I'm missing you guys a lot. I'm in California at that conference. I'm the only art teacher here, which is really weird. So I'm feeling a little fish out of water, but I'm hoping you guys are doing great. Um, I wanted to introduce the next project. As I said, we're going to be moving into portraiture. Portraiture is a very frustrating art form, but it is what many would consider advanced. It's going to push you with your skill, and there's a lot of different ways it can look. So we're going to dig into it a little bit here. Typically, we would be practicing our discussion skills during this lecture. I am not there to assess. So do feel free once this is done to ask Gil any questions. You can also email me any questions, but you will be exempt from discussion on the rubric because I'm not there to see how the discussion goes. So a little bit about history with portraiture. You can kind of tell from these images, it was typically for the rich elites. People who could afford artists would have their portraits done, and so those turned out to be people who came from wealth. And a lot of artists, in order to get into an art school, you had to be a white male. So you can see that visibility in terms of portraiture when we're talking about art history, it was very much from a very specific demographic. What's nice now in modern history is many artists have taken on this art form and really rethought it and used it to elevate people who maybe wouldn't have a voice. So Kehinde Wiley is the one in the top right. He is really fantastic at this. He did Barack Obama's portrait, a pretty famous one. But he actually finds people just from his neighborhood and asks them if he can paint them, and he does them with these really rich patterns, these really rich colors. And so he's really showcasing someone who wouldn't have money to afford a portrait. He's doing this really high quality portrait for them. So he's taking that idea of taking someone's identity who maybe wouldn't come from the background of being able to afford a portrait and really elevating it, which is cool. Frida Kahlo is also someone you probably are familiar with. She's in the bottom right. She's a surrealist, so she talks a lot about her cultural identity as a Mexican woman, Mexican heritage, but she also is talking about her beliefs, her dreams. She talks a lot about not fitting in culturally because she would go between Mexico and Europe and not feel like she fit in either culture. So she uses symbolism a lot, which is, hidden meaning. The one on the left is a woman from Sri Lanka, and she paints portraits, but then they're goddess dreamlike figures with lots and lots of texture. So you can tell they're people. They have that in common, but all the different ways you take on a portrait is very open to interpretation. You probably have a sense of why it's an advanced level skill, but the big thing is you're showcasing your skills of proportion and knowing where the facial features go, but also then how can you express your artistic style through drawing a person. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can make it look hyper realistic, or you can go kind of abstract. But the big thing is a portrait should look like a figure and have a figure's features typically in the spots that they go. But beyond that, you have a ton of freedom with how you express the figure, which makes it a really cool art form to play with. These are the same skills we've been talking about. It shows you know how to observe something. It shows that you can create shape and color through highlights and shadows. It shows composition where you're putting all that stuff on the page. Background gets overlooked in portraiture a lot. It's a really important element. So what's going to go behind my figure? And symbolism, am I hiding any meaning within the work? So one thing to think about when you're doing portraiture that many first-time artists kind of forget to do is if you put the figure in a unique angle, it adds instantly an advanced level to it. So the picture in the middle, just by having the figure sideways, it makes it very, very interesting to look at instead of the standard up and down staring right at the camera. Sometimes just thinking about where the figure is. Are they in profile? Am I seeing just a little bit of them? Can make it very interesting to look at. Now I'm going to encourage all of you to do a self-portrait. So if anyone in the room is thinking, well, maybe I want to be an artist someday, Almost every artist should have a self-portrait in their portfolio. This is Salvador Dali. He did hundreds of self-portraits. His are always very, very playful. He would play with his mustache a lot. He would put flowers on his mustache, which is always very interesting. So almost every artist has a self-portrait. However, if you are really, really averse to doing a self-portrait, you do not have to, but I would suggest that for this assignment. But again, you should do what you think is a acceptable risk for you at this time. So in terms of today and getting started, you're going to want to start to plan out your portrait. You're going to want to sketch in advance, because if you just start to paint it, you're going to struggle. You're not going to end up with stuff in the right place. Your color mixing will kind of be a struggle. There's many different ways to do it. The one on the top left is the grid method, and all that is dividing your paper up into equal boxes and using those to transfer the image. Otherwise, I personally just like to do a rough sketch. The one on the bottom you can see, just laying in the shapes you see of the face, and then you can work into getting it more realistic by adding shading and color and etc. There are mirrors for observing yourself in the advanced painting drawer where you turned in your artwork. It says turn in artwork below. In that drawer there are mirrors. If you're going to do a self-portrait, you're going to want to actually look at yourself and work from that image. So that is available to you if you're interested. Now before I get into the rubric, just a little bit about portraiture and oils. This is the last painting where you're required to use oil. After that, if you want to switch to acrylics or watercolor, that is fine. But for this assignment, since we're doing oil, you can see that the way an artist is painting with oil is they're actually laying in those blocks of colors again, and they're usually starting with the darks, leaving the paper exposed and laying in the lights, and then bringing their brush and trying to smooth it all together. It's going to feel very similar to that object painting where you're just laying in blocks of color, trying to smooth them in, and then once it's dry, going back in and doing the fine lines and details. Like this woman, you can see the very last thing they did was adding the eyelashes and the eyebrows. Otherwise, it's just sort of blocks of color. Okay, going through the rubric. So for this one, we're practicing the basics of using oil paint by creating a painting of a person in an environment. So you need to have something around them, okay? Practice skills like composition, color mixing, highlights and shadows, and creating an environment or background around the person. So remember, we're just picking one of those to push ourselves in to make it more advanced. Students are encouraged to do a unique angle and use themselves as the subject. Again, that says encouraged, not required. So you should do what you think is best. The big ideas for this are how do artists take their work to the next level, and how can you communicate using portraiture. Hopefully you're thinking about lots of interesting ways you can play with the figure. You do not have to do a hyper-realistic picture. You can go abstract, just making sure to think about the figure and the different features of the figure. We're practicing basic techniques of oil painting, and we are starting to think about painting through an advanced level lens. Alright, so here's what you have to do. Again, the discussion you're exempt from because I'm not there to assess it, but everything else is what I'll be looking at on the rubric. So find an image to use a mirror to observe a person, ideally yourself. So in art school, they do not necessarily want you working from a picture because a picture will flatten the image for you. So ideally you're using a mirror, but if you do end up using an image, that's okay. But I would suggest you use a mirror to observe a person, ideally yourself. Use a unique or complex angle for your figure and include a background. Sketch or plan your painting and tape down the edges. Use oil paints to add color to the painting, and use ideas like color mixing, highlights and shadows, composition, space, or meaning to add visual intrigue to your painting. So you're picking one of those to really push yourself in. Now the rubric is everything I described. The big things are make sure you have a sketch of your figure ready to go. Tape down your edges so your paper doesn't come up. Do the usual mixing of paint on a palette. Use liquid or turpentine to thin it out. Avoiding white spots, we're used to that because we don't want the paper exposed. You're picking one advanced level skill to really focus on, and then you're producing an original work of art that is school appropriate and that it has a figure present in the background and few white spots. So hopefully this is pretty clear what you got to do. If it is not clear, feel free to email me. I'll be checking my email all week long, and I'm really happy to help with any questions. But good luck, and I'm really excited to see what you guys come up with. Bye!